Well, hello and welcome to the halfway mark. We are at lesson five of our lessons on the footprints of Jesus and our footsteps of Jesus. Today is February 15th, and we are going to get started. Um, and I just have to tell y'all right off the bat, this lesson's been really hard for me. Um, Things have been really hard for me for a while, and Miss Pat knows, and well, folks know because I've told them. But my mother-in-law is in the hospital, and I'm running back and forth to the hospital, and um, my routine is just way off. And I I realize I really need my routine. I mean, I crave that routine, but because I just feel out of sorts and disconnected when I don't have my routine, and that's showing in my Bible study time. I have to tell you that I'll start every Monday morning with my Bible and an empty journal page in front of me, and then everything hits the fan, and I can't do anything. And so I would think of things, I'll jot stuff down, I'll chase this rabbit, I'll chase that rabbit. But I've found every Saturday of our Bible study so far uh is when I finally get to sit down and try and put things in where it makes some kind of sense. So I wrote down here that most weeks I spend my entire Saturday just trying to make sense of all the rabbits that I've been chasing and all the paths that I've been going on, something to try and teach. And I realized that I am having to do this one step at a time, one step at a time. And so yesterday, God told me I'm only supposed to be doing one step at a time. And He's not showing me anything past this step. Because usually, if I do a 10-week Bible study, I'll try and at least kind of know what direction I'm going by the time, so that I have a purpose for each, so they kind of build on each other, and then the last one will pull it all together, and so I kind of know where I'm going. And with this Bible study, I'm taking one step at a time. And so, but I was thinking about when I started thinking about one step at a time, I started thinking about a few years ago. This has been probably 10, 15 years ago. Um, and my kids, both my boys were still at home. I was doing another health kick, and I'd lost like 5 or 10 pounds maybe, and I was like, okay, we're going to I think we should, as a family, we should start exercising. And we're going to start that. We're going to go to a state park and we're going to hike a trail, the four of us. Yay. And so I decided we were going to go be a little outdoorsy because my kids especially aren't outdoorsy. They like video games and stuff. They're not much on, hiking and fishing and stuff. So I'm like, but I remember when I was a kid, every holiday that we got together, of course, we didn't have video games and all that stuff. We had jigsaw puzzles and we had board games. And, but we would get together every holiday when all the cousins were around and stuff. And after our big meal at lunch, we would go for a walk. All the cousins and all my aunts. I don't remember any uncles going to any walks.
They were watching the
So
football
I
game.
think they were probably watching the football game on a black and white TV with, that had three channels and one of them had to be holding the rabbit ears,
Yes.
for it to come in. So, but I was thinking, those were such great memories. I want my kids to have those memories. So, boys, we're going on a hike. Here's the problem. The first park that we happened to be close to at the time, let me see if I can move this out of the way. The first park we happened to be close to was Pinnacle Mountain State Park
Oh,
in Little Rock. And I had heard it was amazing. They had this amazing view, from Pinnacle Mountain. So it was probably like 3 or so in the afternoon when we got there, middle of the afternoon. And there were the parking lot that we pulled into, there were two trails. One was the was I can't remember what it was called. I think I wrote it down. Um the it didn't go to the pinnacle. The first one didn't go to the pinnacle. It went at the base, and it was a moderate to easy hike. The other one went to the pinnacle, and it said strenuous. And I was like, yeah, I've been exercising. I'm good. I could take a strenuous hike. Mm. We started off up this trail, and they had like markers. It wasn't mile markers, but it was like markers that there were 10 markers, and you knew how close you were getting because it was, 1 to 10. So you started off. So 1, 2, 3, 4, the first four markers, you know, nice little incline. We went on this path, and it would go this way, and then it would go this way, and then it would go this way because, it's going up, but you didn't go straight up. And so we're taking, and there's, rocks and roots and stuff, on this path that we're walking. And about mile marker 4, it got a little steeper. And there's a little bench at each one of the mile markers where you could sit and rest, and if you wanted to change your mind. Um, but we're walking, and about mile marker 5, I think, um, it started getting more of an incline, and there were big rocks that you walked on. So you like were stepping on these rocks. So it was almost like stairs, but the rocks were big. Here, I have a picture you could see.
Oh yeah.
Um, so that was about mile marker, not mile marker, but marker 5. And then it got worse. By the time we got to marker 8, I was like, I have lost my ever loving mind. What did I think was going to happen? And my kids are being troopers. They're trying to, whatever. But we were all, and I had brought a half a bottle of water, and by now I've whatever. Yeah, I really thought I'm just gonna die on this hike. But we were at 8. That was so close. I couldn't stop being that close. But now it's taken us a lot longer to do this than I thought it was going to take. And so it's by the time we made it to 10 at the very top, the sun was about to set. It was like going down. And we're like, we got to get off this mountain before the sun sets because we'll be in trouble. So if we had stopped to look around, we might have noticed a another sign that gave a easier route to go down, but we didn't stop long enough to look at that. We like looking at the sun, snap a picture or two. Okay, let's go, and started back down the way we came, which took even longer than climbing up was going down. And by the time we got to, I don't know, marker number 3 or 4, the sun was gone. It was dark. And we're in the woods in the dark. And we're shuffling along to make sure we're staying on the path. We're laughing and giggling and, having a good time. But I'm like, if we got lost out here, we'd be in so much trouble. And so we finally made our way down, and we heard people in the parking lot. We're like, oh, yay, we're not going to die. But I have to tell you, um, that 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 hike, I don't think we ever went on a hike again with my kids. I don't think they would trust mom ever again. Yes, we got to the top and turned around and came back down. Now, if you've ever walked on a pathway like this, Um, you know that whenever you walk, you really have to focus on your feet. If it's not a path that you know very well, you have to be looking at your feet. And I thought about that whenever I was thinking of God telling me
Mhm.
one step at a time, because when we were coming down the mountain in the dark, we weren't moving at all except for one step. Okay, I'm going to take this step. Is it okay? Take the step. And then, okay, now I can take the step because you have to pay attention to your feet and you can't enjoy the view if you're looking at your feet. So I just think about, all the paths that you want to walk and enjoy the view are the ones that are easy and smooth and well traveled. And life's just not like that. Life's not smooth and easy and well traveled. Um, and when you're, especially if you're denying yourself and taking up your cross and following Christ, there might be times when you want to stop and enjoy the view, but you got to climb first. And so, what I learned from the Pinnacle Mountain hike, for one, is I guess I really did not know the definition of the word strenuous because if I had known, I might have made a different choice. I also overestimated my physical abilities. I thought since I, lost 5 or 10 pounds that I could make that kind of hike. And I, yeah, I do know that it took 3 days before I could stand up or sit down or lay down or cough without crying in pain. It hurt so bad. Every muscle in my body I mean, I sneezed and went, ow, because everything hurt. Um, Another thing that I learned on that hike was the importance of preparation. If I had thought about the hike ahead of time, I might have started earlier in the day than mid afternoon. I definitely would have packed more than a half of a bottle of water. Um, and I might have read the instructions about which way and going back down the easier way than going up. Technically, I never even knew there was an easier way down until I went to look for these pictures because I was looking for pictures to put on my PowerPoint, and I went to the website and it was talking about this hike, and I'm like, which trail was it that I walked on, and I'm looking them all up and it tells you this is a mile and a half and it does this and it does this, but when you get to the top you can follow the markers and come down an easier way. I'm like, really? Really? So I might try it again someday, but take the easier route down. But I would have started, um, I would have done a little more research. I would have done a little more preparation. And that's what we're going to talk about because we are on the halfway point of our journey. Lesson one was, which, by the way, I didn't even have the titles for these lessons until yesterday. Lesson one was ready to follow. Are you ready to walk in the footsteps of Jesus? Lesson two, we got committed to follow, overcoming the obstacles to completely commit to a life of following Jesus. Lesson three was how to follow. Deny yourself, take up your cross, follow Jesus. And then lesson four was the path to follow, because your purpose in this life is not the same as Jesus's purpose, but you do have a purpose or a path. And so today we're going to talk about preparing to follow. Because I realized that's one of the things I had not done was prepare for that hike. And purpose, when you know the purpose or the path, the purpose that you're on, that purpose leads to fulfillment. Um, and we talked about there are millions of people who never find fulfillment in life because they never really know what their purpose is. And that's just so incredibly sad, to not ever know what path you're supposed to be on to begin with. Um, and that's not just in the world, that's believers. There are believers that never take the path that they're supposed to take and lead lives that are just completely unfulfilled. Um, Purpose also gives you strength that you never knew you had. And your purpose provides the direction that you're supposed to go. So if you're not sure about your purpose, um, you got to stop sitting down here at the midway point, or maybe even at the starting point, and we got to push forward. We're going to push forward to prepare to follow this path. So the first question I have here is, how old was Jesus when he knew he was God? Yeah, yeah. I'm thinking, and that's what that's a bunch of the rabbits that I chased this week. Was, how old was Jesus when he knew he was God? Lana, what do you think?
I think he always knew.
Like always, always, like as a
Yes.
baby?
Yes.
Um, and that's what I was thinking was, how, what do I remember knowing as a baby? I have lots of questions. I am a question asker, and most of my rabbits come because I'm asking questions. And so I started looking about, because how old was Jesus when he knew he was God? Because here's the thing, Jesus was all the way God, but he was also all the way human. So he was completely human. So, as completely human, we know that the baby Jesus cried and burped and pooped just like every other baby. Um, he breastfed every couple of hours. We don't usually think about, we see baby Jesus in the manger and the Mary and the halo and all that stuff, but Mary breastfed Jesus. I know. And he would have cooed and he would have coughed and he would have farted and everything that babies do, Jesus would have done because he was a human baby. Um, so I started doing a little research, and there are experts that say um, there's a process of self-awareness for babies. When babies are newborn and they just sleep a lot, but then every day almost you see changes in an infant. And you remember the first time they seem to recognize your voice. We know that infants recognize their mother's voice very early. Um, the other people in their lives, they may not recognize that voice right away, but it does change. Then the time when the baby follows you walking across the room and he's aware of you rock. And it's so exciting where you're like, oh, the baby smiled. No, he didn't. It was gas. Yeah. No. Yeah. I know. Look, he's smiling. No, he's not smiling. So the changes in a baby happen daily those first few months. I mean, you don't want to miss anything. Um, and you ba- parents recognize the different stimuli that a baby responds to, like noise and um, sounds of people's voices, light, movement. They react to those different stimuli, and Jesus would have had all those same reactions. He would have felt cold. He would have felt hot. He would have known when he peed and cried because he was wet or dirty. All those things because he was a baby. but he still probably was not self-aware. Most of the time, infants aren't self-aware until somewhere between 1 year to 12 to 15 months old. So at um, 12 to 15 months old, infants become, they believe infants become self-aware. And before that time, baby Jesus would have, smiled and rolled over. He would have started crawling and exploring, all right on target, because he was a human baby. Um, and I mean, we really don't know anything about Jesus as a baby. We know the minimal things we know. We know that he was born in Bethlehem. We know that his parents were in the lineage of David, which is why they were in Bethlehem. We know that Joseph and Mary followed the law of Moses because they named him and circumcised him at 8 days old. And we know they followed the custom of the law because they redeemed him with an offering at the temple when he was 40 days old. I actually chased this rabbit for a little bit because, in the Old Testament, you're the Jewish family, the firstborn of everything, firstborn of your livestock, the firstborn of your children belong to God. And if you want to keep the baby for yourself, which, most of us do, you had to redeem him. So baby Jesus had to be redeemed. And the price of that redemption, we know that Joseph presented the two doves or the two birds because that was the price of a family that was poor. So those are the only things we really know about Jesus is that he was born to a poor family that followed the law of Moses, and he was the firstborn because he was redeemed um, in the temple when he was 40 days old. So we know that the wise men, when they traveled, they would not have started traveling until they, first of all, they would have noticed the star, then they would have had to follow, they would have had to watch it for a few nights to see if it moved or what it did, and then go, hey, did you guys notice that star? We should start watching that star. And so they might have watched it for a month before they started looking to see what it was about. And then after that, it might have taken them a while to figure out that they should head that direction and get some gifts together. And the travel time from Persia to Jerusalem would have taken them probably about 3 months, 2 to 3 months for a caravan to travel that far. So we know the wise men did not come when Jesus was still in the manger, because if they had come and brought gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, then Joseph would have not offered two turtle doves as the redemption price. He would have had means to have a redemption price. So we know that the wise men didn't come within the first 40 days. In all probability they would have come around when Jesus was probably about a year old. So if you think about Jesus being a normal baby with normal development, then we can assume that by the time of the wise man, he would have laughed and cooed, and maybe he had a word or two. He said mama or dada. He said, and he may have taken his first couple of steps, and whatever was handed to him, he stuck it in his mouth because that's what babies do. Now, because he can't communicate yet, he can't talk. Now, there are some of books written, people talk about all the time, like, why aren't these books in the Bible? They were written by people, or whatever. There are some books that are not in the Bible that were written that says the baby Jesus talked to the wise men and blessed them and, did this and that and brought a baby bird to life and, all kinds of miracle stuff that they say baby Jesus did. And they say that baby Jesus spoke in full sentences, when he was to the shepherds or whatever. Um, I don't believe that's true because he wouldn't have been all human.
Right.
If if he had been a baby infant speaking in full sentences, then he wouldn't have been a human baby. It wouldn't, yeah, because yeah. So so we know that he was about had to have been around a year old at least. So most children have their first memories at around 3 to 3.5 years old. Do you remember any of your first memories?
Oh, this is 4.5, 5 years old
Mhm.
when my granddaddy died,
Mhm.
and it was Christmas, and we had all the families would meet at our house, all the cousins and everything, and my granddaddy was in a bed. Then they called it hardening of the arteries,
Mhm.
which is plaque and all.
Mhm.
And Dad came in Christmas Eve about middle of the night, and we were all on pallets on the floors. And I remember him coming in and saying, we couldn't say anything. And I thought, oh, what a Christmas.
Yeah.
I remember
You remember that?
coming in that
Mhm.
door and telling us granddaddy was gone.
Mhm. Say if you remember something earlier than that, it's probably something you remember based on stories that you've heard. So you've heard stories and you're like, oh yeah, I kind of remember that. So LaDonna, do you remember what your first memories are?
Oh, I had happy memories.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, we had a big front porch, and my mom, she brought I had a little table and chair and a little cabinet and things, doll
Mhm.
beds, and she put them all out on the porch so I could go out there and play with them. That's
There you
that's
go.
what I
That's your
remember.
first one of your first memories.
Yeah.
One of my first memories, my baby sister was just walking. So she's 2 years younger than me. So I would have been about 3.5. And for Christmas, I got a China set, tea set. And Melanie climbed up over at the table and picked up the tea thing and threw it on the ground and broke it.
Oh, no.
So I remember that. I remember the house that we lived in because I remember that you could go out the back door and go down some stairs. And I fell down the stairs. It wasn't a lot of stairs, it was like 3 or 4 stairs. I fell down, and the neighbor's dog ran over and started licking my face. And I thought he was biting me, and I was screaming. I was afraid of dogs for a long time. In that same house, I remember riding a bicycle with training wheels. And I was so proud of myself. And I remember the feeling of, I'm riding a bicycle. I'm riding a bicycle. So yeah, those were some of my earliest memories. I do have one memory, and I don't know how old I was, and I might have been even younger than that because I don't remember if my baby sister was there or not. But I remember I remember we were at the zoo and my dad was carrying me on his shoulders. So I had to have been little. He was carrying me on his shoulders, and we were at it was some kind of aquatic, like a seal or something, or walrus or something in this whatever. And he leaned over. And I remember thinking, my father's trying to kill me. My father's going to throw me to this monster. I didn't even know what kind of animal it was, but I remember screaming because I remember thinking my father was going to throw me to the monster. So I have some very vivid early memories. Um, and that those are things I know happened that nobody told me about. I also remember the bedroom that I slept in, and my little sister was in the crib, and I had a big girl bed, and my mom had taken construction paper and cut the letters of the alphabet out of construction paper and put them along the top of the wall like a border. And so I remember that when I laid in my bed, the letter A was over here,
Oh.
and you could follow them, and then the letter, I think it was like a M or an N, was over the door, and then it ended like right over here. I remember the alphabet at the top of the border of the room. So those are things that I vividly remember. For Jesus, Jesus would have been, um, if whenever the wise men left, if he had been a year or two, between probably a year, between 12 to 15 months, because Herod ordered the killing of all babies under the age of 2, and he probably would have wanted a buffer there. So, to make sure he got them. And so that's why they think that Jesus was about a year old when Joseph took Mary and Jesus to live in Egypt. So Jesus's first memories would have been from living like a nomad in Egypt, on the run, on the down low, dad taking odd jobs or whatever. Well, actually, they probably lived off of what they got from the wise men, as they were living in Egypt. And if you look at historically from the time, because an angel told Joseph that the Herod that wanted to kill him was gone, they would have been, Jesus was probably around 4 years old when they returned to Nazareth, which would have been the birthplace of his mother, because she was from Nazareth. And then he would have started Torah school around age 5 or 6. And he would have gone to school in Nazareth at the synagogue. There would have been a rabbi that would have taught all the boys, starting at age 5 to 6 in Nazareth. So can you imagine God going to Torah school? I know, right? So this is what we knew. The only thing we know about Jesus as a child is in Luke chapter 2, verse 40. It says, and the child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon him. The King James says, the child grew and waxed strong in spirit. So that word waxed strong in spirit indicates that he grew physically as well as mentally or spiritually. So there is a relationship between the physical and the mental growth. So from ages 3 to 10 years old, physically, our growth comes in spurts. And we'll have a growth spurt, and all of a sudden the shoes that you were wearing 2 days ago, you can't wear anymore. Your kids, you get clothes for your kids, and they don't even can't get a chance to wear them until they've grown out of them. Mentally, from ages 3 to around 7, 8 years old, children are in this state of curiosity. Okay, so that toddlers start with, what's this? What's that? What's this? What's that? What's this? What's that? So do you think Jesus did that? He was a normal little kid. He, as God, he would know all this, but as human, learning speech, his mom had to teach him words. What's this? What's that? And then we all know that children move from what's this? What's that? To why? 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 And then we eventually say, because I said so.
Yes.
And then they get old enough where they get to the who says who? Who says? I remember when you go into school and my teacher had more authority than my parents did. And my parents would say this thing, and I would say, but the teacher says blah, 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 because you get into that questioning, and that prepares you for those teenage years when you're really seeking So somewhere in this process, from 3 to around 10 or so, the mental and the spiritual meet. And the questions change from wanting to know why to challenging the reasons and exploring the logic. And if Jesus was a normal human child, he would have been curious. So this opens us to the age that churchy people call the age of accountability. The actual word, what it is it is being spiritually aware. So
We're taught.
the age that I was spiritually aware. Mhm.
Mom said there is because when they became 12 years old, they had to go to Catholic school and learn the catechisms. Well, we were Methodist. There's some Catholicism and Methodism. So we learned a little of that. So we all were taught that by the time you were 12 years old, you should have known right from wrong. And my dad was a Southern Baptist. He was a Methodist. And he said, no, he agreed more with Baptist. You know, way before then, you just are learning. So,
Thing is that age of spiritual awareness, it's different for every person. Some of it has to do with the family that you grew up in and the culture that you have, like Catholic culture. They expect you to have that spiritual awareness by the time you're 12. Because I was raised in a preacher's house and all around me where I heard words, churchy words, my whole life. I became more spiritually aware at a younger age. And I heard them talking about salvation and, how to be saved and why to be saved. And I remember whenever the revival that I asked, that I, told my dad I wanted to be saved, I was about 7. And the visiting preacher was telling me the Roman road and all that stuff. And I remember thinking, yeah, I know that part. Yeah, I know that part. I know that part. Can we just get to the bottom line? Let me pray the prayer.
Turn it around. I need for you to go to a rabbit hole with you. Okay. Being a preacher's child, do you think you knew more about salvation and religion than because I grew up hearing, well, they were a preacher's child. They know more than we do. Did you feel that when you were young, or did your dad not put you in that position?
I honestly, I thought every family was like mine. I didn't know that there were people that didn't know about God stuff, because our whole life was God stuff. And because they're a preacher's kid, I never thought I was better than anybody. I just thought everybody was like me, that we were all, I remember when I did get saved and I went to my back to school, and I told my teacher, I remember it was the first grade, and I told her that I'd got saved over the weekend, and she said, "Oh, that's nice." And I remember thinking, everybody else that I said that to in my life, church, family, they were all like, "Oh, that's amazing. That's wonderful." Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, "What do you mean that's nice? That's better than nice." And that was the first time I knew that not everybody was like me. That was the first, not even negative, but like, how do you not know? How do you not be excited about that? So being spiritually aware doesn't mean that you don't, because some societies call it a coming of age. You've heard of the coming of age story. That is what the age of accountability is, that stage of curiosity that opens the door. And we all have to go through that. Every culture in the whole world has a coming of age time frame. Some of it is specific to culture like the Catholic Church, where you're 12 years old when you start your catechism classes. And by then you make a decision. But if you're like, in some cultures, there are cultures where when a boy gets to a certain age, they send him out into the woods to hunt and find kill his first whatever. And that's how he becomes a man. That's his rite of passage. And so we have these physical rites of passage, but there's also this spiritual rite of passage, the time when you start thinking about stuff. So it's just like in school when you're in kindergarten, they check a little thing about if you know how to share, or the section of does not play well with others, or whatever they make, because those are check marks of development. You got your deportment grade. Well, every society has their check mark of social markers, and there are spiritual markers. The time when you're like, so Jesus would have gone through these same things. His schooling would have lasted from age 5 or 6 to about 10 or 11 years old. Now, most of the time, the top students in a class would be selected to be Talmudim to a rabbi, the student that would continue on with religious instruction. Does it say anything to us that Jesus wasn't picked to be the rabbi's favorite student? I don't know. We do know that in Torah school, he would have memorized through repetition the first 5 books of the Bible.
Cool.
Yes.
I can't even.
They would have memorized, because they didn't have this to carry around with them. They carried it around in here. And all the other books that we know of the Old Testament would have been taught a lot. Not every word would have been memorized, but most of it would have been committed to memory, along with all of his other classmates. They would have all known the same story. So I want you to think about this for just a minute. Did 6-year-old Jesus have deja vu? Yeah. I mean, the first time he memorized, and God said, "Let there be light." Did he remember saying it? I know. I'm telling you, these are the rabbits that I chased this week. So did 7 or 8-year-old Jesus feel God's presence when they were learning about the building of the tabernacle? And when they described the pillar of fire or the cloud that guided them through the wilderness, did he know what that felt like? I mean, I think he did. I think he had that deja vu thing. I think that the physical body of Jesus, who was all 100% human, had the spiritual awakening where he became aware of, I'm a part of that. I know that. Let me give you a couple more. Imagine 7-year-old Jesus memorizing Isaiah's vision in Isaiah chapter 6. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. When he memorized that, I think 7-year-old Jesus was like, I know what that looks like. I can see what that looks like. We have this image of what Jesus looks like because we've got pictures of him on the wall and all that stuff. I remember as a very small child, I remember going to the big, huge family Bible, because we were always the first ones at church, and we were there, 30 minutes before anybody else showed up. So I had lots of time to play and look around, and I would go to that big family Bible and I would look at all the pictures. So as a 3-year-old, I was thumbing through pictures of the Big Family Bible so that whenever you say Moses lifted up
Yes.
the rod over the ocean, I get in my mind the picture that I see is the one from the Big Family Bible because that's my image. So Jesus would have seen in his mind the throne room, the Lord sitting up on a throne high and lifted up, in his train, the train of his robe filling the temple. And I think he knew, he had been there, that was his home. I think in verse 2 it says, above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. So I'm thinking the rabbi's trying to describe a seraphim, maybe drawing a picture on the chalkboard, or whatever or a school equivalent of a chalkboard is. And he's trying to draw a picture, and Jesus, I don't know if he said it. I don't know if he said, no, that's not quite what they look like. Because he had seen it with his own eyes. And he knew. I think he knew. How about this one? Isaiah 6:3. And one called to the other and said, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the rabbi would have taught this by chanting over and over again. So imagine his most impassioned version of this song. And Jesus heard the actual voices because he had heard this song. He knew this song. So what we were saying about did Jesus always know? I think from the time he was aware, he knew. I don't think he knew when he was a baby, because as a human infant, he wouldn't have had awareness. I think as soon as he had awareness, now here's the other thing. We also don't know what his parents had told him. And it's very possible that Mary and Joseph told him over and over and over again about his birth story, about where he came from, and that they knew he had a very important purpose.
They told me how special I was.
Uh-huh.
Would I be uppity if I was a human? Or Jesus being in Jesus' form and God made him not special.
And what information did they give? There are things you don't explain. You don't explain what a virgin is to a 2-year-old.
Right.
I mean, that's just not age appropriate. But once they get to, and we don't know about the culture of the time, or and all that stuff. But imagine if you knew your birth story, and you get to chant with your classmates Isaiah 7:14. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. And I think when he learned which, I can't even imagine Jesus having to learn the words that he actually had already spoken, but saying them with his classmates. And you will call his name Emmanuel. That's me. I am God with them. It's just, I don't know. So we're going to look real quick at Luke chapter 2. This is the other thing we know about Jesus as a child. This is the last thing that we know about Jesus as a child. In Luke chapter 2, verse 41 through 52, we know the story about Jesus in the temple. So the occasion would have been the Feast of the Passover. Joseph, we know, is still alive, but we don't hear about Joseph again. This is the last time we hear about him. And this is the last Passover before Jesus turns 13. Okay. So at 13, a Jewish boy becomes a son of the law. Now we know it in our modern days as a bar mitzvah. In Jesus's day, it wasn't a thing yet. That wasn't bar mitzvah didn't happen until like in 1,000 years, like in the 1500s or 1600s, and they started doing. But that's what the words mean, is a son of the law. So at 12 years old, they would have been a son of the law, so that if they are the firstborn, and they have the birthright of the family in the absence of a father, the uh the firstborn, if they were over the age of 13, were the ones that would take the lamb for sacrifice to the temple for the Passover, and they would kill the Passover lamb. That was always the father, head of household's job, was to carry the lamb, and the uh, oldest son, when they hit 13, they were the ones that did this. So I don't know when Joseph died, but can you imagine Jesus taking the lamb to the Passover feast and laying his hand on the lamb and watching the lamb die? And he knew he was the lamb. That one day that would be him. So,
Brother Bill always talks about his obedience, that through all his childhood and all his life till 33, he knew it was going to happen.
think about what kind of questions a 12-year-old would ask. But Luke 2:43 says, when the feast was ended and as they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, and his parents did not know it. The King James, it says he tarried behind in Jerusalem. So he wasn't left behind. He stayed behind. And I don't know what happened when they tell the story with the flannel graph. Nobody ever explains how they lost him.
Yeah.
But somehow they lost him. I've made up stories in my head of how they lost him, because I like writing little fictional stories, of what could have happened. I won't even go there because we don't have time to do all that stuff. But we do know that he was drawn to the temple. And when he told his parents, "Why were you looking for me? Wouldn't you know I would be about my father's business?" I always thought he was being a little sassy. It's like, don't you sass your mama? But he was drawn to the temple, and I remember thinking, as I would think it through, I taught my kids, hey, if I ever lose you in the store, don't go looking for me. Okay? You go stand in the middle of an aisle and stay right there, and I will find you. That's what I taught my children when they were tiny. If you get lost in the woods, if you get lost in a store, if you get lost anywhere, stand in the middle of the widest aisle or the widest open space and wait for me, and I will find you. If you want to scream and holler, you can do that too. But I will find you. So I'm thinking Jesus probably thought, you know what? They've left. They'll figure out I'm not with them soon enough. I'm just going to go to the safest place in the entire city and wait for them to come find me. I mean, that's what I would think. But anyway, so this was the same temple where just a few days ago they had killed thousands and thousands of sheep to cover the sins of everybody who is now going home. The word tarried behind is hupomone, and it is the same word that's translated endured, and it's associated with patient endurance. The fruit of the spirit, where it says patience, that word is hupomone. That's patience inspired by hope, because you know that something is going to happen. There's a coming reward, and you can endure it. I just thought that was interesting. So 3 days later, he was sitting among the teachers of the law, listening and asking questions. All who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. So what kind of questions do you think a 12-year-old Jesus would ask? Anybody have any ideas? We don't know, because we don't know what kind of questions he asked, but here he is in the temple asking questions, and I'm thinking it's like the perfect time to get some answers,
Mhm.
you know? So, do you remember what age you were when you became spiritually aware?
Mm.
LaDonna, do you remember?
I was 6 years old.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think you were so young?
Probably because I was the way I was raised.
Yeah. You'd heard it your whole life?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. You know, sometimes we talk about it being the spiritually aware as a time when you um, feel drawn to something, like you ask the questions like, why am I even here? So for those of us who were raised in churches and had all the churchy words and everything, we could be quite younger. But it is usually sometime after 12. I would think probably closer to 14 or 15, whenever most teenagers get to that spot where they like, why am I even here? What is the meaning of my life? Mhm.
Being raised by Catholic,
Mhm.
I mean, we knew what the Immaculate Conception was.
Mhm.
And I was in school in music class, and we were going to sing a song. And the music teacher stood up and she said, well, we're going to sing about the Immaculate Conception. And nobody in here knows what that is. And I said, well, I do. And she said, Patsy, and even back then, you talk all the time. You do not know what that is. And I said, but I do. She said, well, suppose you come up to the front of the class and you tell us. Well, you don't ask me to do that. And I said, Mary had a baby without ever being having sexual intercourse with. She said, sit down. You asked me. You asked me. But my mother, we were about 10 years old. Because I heard her say it on the porch, and I said, Mom, what's that?
Yeah, I've got these questions, just the questions. So, um, in ancient Greek philosophers, they would sit around all day pondering the meaning of life. What is the meaning of life? And one of the reasons they would do that is because every one of us at some point ponder, what why am I even here? What's my purpose? Did you hear the word? What's my purpose? One of my favorite sermons is from Acts chapter 17. Um, Paul is talking to the men of Athens, which, by the way, is in Greece, where all those philosophers sitting around pondering the meaning of life. And he tells them that the God who created every one of us and determined our lifespan and our timeline and the limits of our existence did so for a specific reason. In verse 28, it says that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is not far from each one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being. See, when Jesus reached the age of awareness, he already knew his purpose. He knew what the meaning of his life was to be. He was sent to be the sacrificial lamb to pay the sins of the world. So the meaning of your life can only be found by seeking after God. And only by seeking after God will your purpose be revealed, because God is the one who gives purpose. So it all sounds good, but what does that look like? Jesus showed us in his childhood. The only recorded interaction of Jesus before his ministry is in the temple where he stayed behind. And what was he doing? He found the smartest crowd in the place and he started asking questions. So that's what the first step there is seek God and ask what they might have. They might have condescended to him. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How old are you, kid? So seek God and ask questions. Now, last week we talked about 2 Corinthians 5:20. your homework about an ambassador, and did you get a definition of an ambassador or what you know an ambassador does?
He's a messenger.
Keep running out around me. Ask one of them. Ask
No,
Ladonna.
Wanda can't.
Oh, she can't. You know,
Go ahead. You said a So an ambassador, what an ambassador does is it represents a specific authority, like a president or a king, within another realm. Okay, that's the dictionary definition. So the ambassador does not represent themselves, and an ambassador doesn't hold any personal opinions. They solely represent the ruler they serve. In our case, that would be God. Within another realm. In that case, in our case, that would be this world, because we are ambassadors for Christ. So to prepare for this role, because remember, we're talking about preparation. To prepare for this role, you must first seek the person of God and then ask questions, lots of questions, and then listen for the answers. Because some of the answers might be easier to find because somebody may have asked that question before. And other questions may be unique to you. But it's okay to ask questions because there's nothing you can ask that God hasn't already got the answer. Seek ye first. Seek ye first the kingdom of God. Okay. So I'm gonna stop sharing because that was all. And I'm sorry if that I feel like I've
Oh, no.
all over the place because that's the way my life is. One step at a time. Ask, seek and ask. Because and we know because when we knock and we seek and we ask that we will find it. So that's our lesson for today. I don't know if it got anywhere or went anywhere, but hopefully I can chase some more rabbits while I'm sitting in the hospital room this week, taking care of my mother-in-law. But for some reason, God's only given me one step at a time, and I remember there's a song, I think, or a poem about just enough light for the step I'm on. Something about Jesus being a lamp to my feet and a light to my path, but he's only going to give me enough light for the step I'm on. Not a mile ahead, not, it's just enough light for the step that I'm on. I got to find that. It's like a poem or something. Do you know what I'm talking about, LaDonna?
Nope.
Okay. I'll have to look it up. I'll have to search for it because it's something about having enough light for just the step I'm on. So, all right. Well, I'm going to stop our recording because I think we went overtime, but just a little bit. So everybody who's watching our recording, we will see you next time.